Welcome to the deep dive. You're here because, well, you want to get straight to the heart of complex stuff, right? Without all the fluff.
Exactly.
Today, we're tackling a really cool piece of hardware, the Doepfer MAQ16 MIDI analog sequencer.
And what's neat about this one is we're going straight to the user manual, kind of understanding it directly from the source.
Yeah, straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Now, you look at the MAQ, you see those 3 rows of 16 knobs, the little display.
Uh-huh.
You think, okay, sequencer. But the manual, it tells a richer story, doesn't it?
It really does. It wasn't just, dreamt up as a simple analog box. There's this legend, or at least strong suggestion, that Kraftwerk had some input.
Kraftwerk. Really?
Yeah, the manual kind of hints that the initial idea was maybe simpler, but feedback, maybe specifically from them, pushed it towards this more sophisticated MIDI thing.
Ah, okay, so their like super precise rhythmic thing probably demanded more control.
That's the idea. Precise event control, solid sync. Things you see in the MIDI side, even the slightly non-standard bits, it's not just about spitting out notes, it's about building complex patterns.
Gotcha. So our mission today, unpack the core features, maybe some of the more interesting capabilities of the MAQ16 using just this manual as our guide.
Let's do it.
Consider us your guides through this surprisingly deep box. So first things first, getting power to it. How does that work?
Okay, basics. It needs an external power supply. You're looking at 9 to 12 volts DC, needs at least 500 milliamps. And crucially, it's center positive.
Right. Standard stuff mostly.
Mostly. The manual points out this little quirk, though. In Germany, you get the adapter in the box. Elsewhere, maybe not. You might have to find your own.
Good to know.
And yeah, here's a very Doepfer thing. No power switch. Plugging it in turns it on. That's
simple. Direct. Okay. MIDI connection.
The standard MIDI in, MIDI out ports. The manual's clear MIDI in is for sync or transposing sequences or some of the remote control stuff we'll get into. But important note, no MIDI merge. Whatever comes in the MIDI in doesn't automatically pass through to the out.
Ah, so if you're chaining gear, you might need a through box or a splitter.
Exactly. Good point to remember for setups.
Then there's the analog side, CV, and gate outputs.
It's 6 little 3.5 millimeter jacks. You get a CV and a gate output for each of the 3 rows.
So 1 pair per row.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And the manual says they play nice with Doepfer's AIR100 modular system, obviously, but they'll work with lots of other analog synths, too.
What kind of voltage are we talking?
Specified as 0.25 volts up to 5.25 volts. So CV, usually for pitch, gate tells the synth note on-off. Standard analog control.
And I think the manual mentioned something about tweaking those voltages internally.
It did. This is pretty cool. There are internal trim pots, tiny little dials inside the machine.
For fine-tuning.
Exactly. You can adjust the CV scale precisely to match your other gear. They're factory set for the common 1 volt per octave standard, but you can tweak it.
But handle with care?
Definitely. The manual gives a little warning. Messing up the CV scale isn't covered by warranty, so maybe leave it unless you really know what you're doing.
Right. Okay, so we're plugged in, it powers on. What pops up on that little LED screen first?
First thing you see, according to the manual, is the software version, like 350 for version 3.50, just for a second.
Okay.
Then, bam, it shows the tempo and BPM, beats per minute. And you can start changing that right away with the main data dial. None of the menu lights are on yet.
And those 8 menu buttons. That's where the action is, yeah.
That's the brain. The manual makes this clear distinction. Menus 1 through 6 are row specific. They only affect whichever row is currently selected.
Okay, 1 row at a time for those.
But menus 7 and 8 are global. They affect the whole sequencer.
Got it. Let's dive into menu 1, event. What kind of MIDI messages can these rows send?
This is where you decide the job for each row. And the list is pretty long. You've got your basic note, oh no, AFF, of course, velocity, how hard the note hits.
Standard stuff.
Yeah, but then also various MIDI controllers, mod wheel, sustain, breath controller, you name it, pitch bend, aftertouch, both channel and polyphonic, program changes for switching synth patches.
Wow, okay, lots of control options.
And it gets more creative. A row can be set to control the step duration or gate time of another row, or dynamically switch the MIDI channel for another row, or even add transposition amount to another row's pitch.
Hold on, a row controlling transposition, that sounds like it could generate some really evolving melodies or harmony.
Exactly. Pretty powerful. And even within the note ONO-FF type, you've got options. Normal mode or pause mode.
Pause mode.
Yeah, if you set a step's knob all the way right in pause mode, that step becomes silent. Its LED doesn't even light up, kind of like a programmable mute for that step.
Handy. What about absolute versus relative pitch?
Right. Absolute means the knob position always maps to the same specific note within the selected octave range. Fixed.
Okay.
Relative mode lets incoming MIDI notes on that row's channel transpose the whole sequence up or down on the fly. More interactive.
I see. And you mentioned velocity and aftertouch. How do they link up?
Good question. The manual says if you set a row to output velocity, it needs to be paired with another row that's actually outputting notes. Makes sense, right? Velocity needs a note to apply to.
Yeah, logically.
You could even have one velocity row affect multiple note rows, though the manual kind of nudges you to think if that's musically useful.
Yeah.
Same idea for polyphonic aftertouch. One row sends notes, another sends the pressure data for those notes.
Okay. And step duration is in this menu too.
Yep. You can set a row to define the length of each step, basically the gate time. Uses scaling factors based on the MIDI clock. If you turn a knob all the way left, it effectively skips that step in the sequence.
Another way to create rhythmic variations.
Totally. And one more thing here, new in version 3.5 apparently, is user-definable controllers. So you can assign specific MIDI CC numbers.
More flexibility.
But the manual adds this little caution again, make sensible configurations. Just because you can link anything doesn't mean it'll sound good.
Though sometimes breaking the sensible rules leads to happy accidents, right?
Absolutely. That's half the fun. Okay, menu 2, channel. This one seems simpler.
Yeah, feels like it should be.
It pretty much is. You just assign a MIDI channel 1 through 16 to each row. Simple as that.
But there's a catch.
Well, the manual notes if you've already set a row's event in menu 1 to be something like velocity or step duration or that dynamic MIDI channel thing, then the channel you set here in menu 2 doesn't really matter for that row because its function or the row it's linked to dictates the channel.
Ah, okay. So the event assignment can override the channel settings sometimes. Good to know.
Right. Menu 3, first last step. Now this sounds interesting for rhythms.
Yeah, I was looking forward to this one.
This is really powerful. For each row independently, you can set which step it starts on from 1 to 16 and which step it ends on.
So you can have different sequence lengths running on each row at the same time.
Exactly. Instant polyrhythms. The manual specifically suggests trying, say, a 16-step note sequence on row 1, but maybe a 7-step velocity sequence on row 2 controlling it. The accents would constantly shift.
Ooh, that's clever. Creating evolving patterns automatically.
And you can change these first and last step values while it's running. For live performance, that's amazing. You can morph the sequence lengths on the fly.
Very cool. Okay, menu 4, press scale. What's that about?
Prescale adjusts the timing between the steps for each row. Think of it like a clock divider or multiplier just for that row. It's measured in MIDI clock ticks.
So you can make one row run faster or slower than the others, but they all stay locked to the main tempo.
Precisely. You could have row 1 playing eighth notes, row 2 playing quarter notes, row 3 maybe doing really slow changes, all perfectly synced.
And it affects note duration too.
Yeah. For row sending notes, you can also adjust the note duration here, the time between the note on and the note off, again in MIDI clock units.
How does this interact with setting step duration back in menu 1?
Good question. The manual points out that if you have assigned a row to step duration in menu 1, those settings will work together with or potentially override the prescale settings here. So you have multiple ways to control timing.
Lots of timing flexibility then. Okay, menu 5 is no BE. 13 modes. Wow.
Yeah, this is another deep one. Again, set per row, you've got the basics, forward, reverse.
Standard sequencer directions.
Then 2 pendulum modes back and forth. Random, which does exactly what you'd expect.
Always fun.
2 types of one-shot modes, and a simple one-note mode. Loads of options for how the sequence plays back.
And clock versus note trigger.
Right. For the first 5 modes, forward, reverse, pendulums, random, you can choose. Clock trigger means it steps along with the MIDI clock, like normal.
Okay.
Note trigger means an incoming MIDI note on that row's channel makes the sequence advance 1 step. So you could sort of play the sequence progression from a keyboard.
Interesting performance angle.
Right.
What's the difference between pendulum 1 and 2?
Subtle, but important. The manual says pendulum 1 plays the first and last steps twice each time it changes direction. Gives them a bit more emphasis.
Okay, like dwelling on the ends.
Pendulum 2 plays them only once, so the back and forth feels a bit smoother, maybe slightly shorter overall in feel.
And the one-shot modes.
One-shot 1 plays the sequence through from first to last step once, then just stops. You have to manually restart it.
Okay, for specific phrases.
One-shot 2 is designed for chaining. When a row in this mode finishes, it automatically triggers the next row that's also set to one-shot 2. So you could build longer, multi-part sequences across the rows.
Ah, clever. And one-note mode.
Just plays the currently selected step repeatedly. The manual suggests it's useful with remote control, which we'll get to.
Got it. Menu 6, single step. Sounds like an editing tool.
Exactly. It's your microscope for looking at individual steps. You can step through the sequence one event at a time using the start-stop button.
Slowly, to check values.
Yeah. There's a global mode where all 3 rows advance together, or a single row mode where you focus on just one row, and the display shows the actual MIDI value for that step. Great for fine-tuning.
Makes sense.
But the manual also mentions a cool live use. You can rapidly press start-stop to sort of scan through the steps manually, creating these glitchy, stuttering effects in real time.
Ooh, performance potential again.
And maybe the handiest part of single-step mode, you can mute or unmute individual steps using the start-stop button while holding the step button. These mutes stick even after you leave the menu.
That is handy. Great for building up patterns or dropping parts out live.
Definitely. Very useful feature.
Okay, now we're on to the global menus. Menu 7, preset. 30 presets seems like a decent amount.
Yeah, it gives you room to store quite a few setups. This menu handles saving and loading all the settings for all 3 rows, modes, channels, everything.
So you can save entire song sections or performance setups.
Exactly. Up to 30 slots. Preset 1 is special. That's the one that loads automatically when you turn the MAQ on, your default state.
Okay. What about preset 0?
Preset 0 is also unique. It's not really a stored preset. Selecting preset 0 basically tells the MAQ, show me what the knobs are physically set to right now.
Ah, like a panel setting. Useful if you've been tweaking knobs and lost track of the stored preset.
Precisely. You can recall any stored preset, 130, tweak it just by turning knobs. The MAQ updates the value instantly and then save your changes back into any slot.
Seems straightforward. What about backups? Saving all your work.
The manual covers MIDI system exclusive or sysx dumps. If you try to save to preset 0, it actually sends the current preset's data out as a sysx message.
Okay, so you can save presets one by one that way to a computer or librarian.
Right. And for a full backup of all 30 presets at once, you need to send a specific sysx command to the MAQ. It then responds by dumping its entire memory, all 4,106 bytes of it, the manual specifies.
For 41 6 bytes exactly. They sound serious about that.
Yeah, they strongly warn you to make sure the file size is perfect when you load a dump back in, or you could scramble the MAQ's memory.
Yikes. Handle with care. Is there a factory reset?
Yep. You can initialize either a single preset or the whole bank back to factory defaults by holding the preset button while powering it on. But obviously, that erases your stored data.
Good to know it's there if needed. Okay, last menu button, menu 8. Start, stop. Not really a menu, is it?
No, more of a mode button. Pressing it just toggles the sequencer playing or stopping. Simple.
And the display shows tempo here.
Correct. When start-stop is active, the display shows the tempo in BPM, and you use the data dial to change it.
What about syncing to other gear?
That's done here too. If you turn the data dial past the max tempo, like 250 BPM, or below the minimum, like 30 BPM, you access the external sync modes.
Wow, okay.
You'll see ETS for external trigger start or Excessi for external trigger continue. In these modes, the MAQ listens to MIDI clock coming into the MIDI import and follows that timing completely.
So it can be the master clock or it can slave to another device. Flexible.
Very.
Now the manual seemed to hint at some stuff beyond these menus. More advanced control. Remote control.
Yes, Appendix A. This gets into some, let's say, unique MIDI implementation, non-standard stuff.
Intriguing. What can you do?
You can actually control a bunch of MAQ parameters remotely using MIDI program change messages and note events, but they have to be sent on specific, specially assigned MIDI channels.
Special channels.
Yeah, the manual calls them channel XX and channel YY. You have to do a special button combo on Power Up to even set what channels XX and YY are.
Okay, so it's a deliberate setup.
Right. And the manual is very clear. This is not standard MIDI behavior. If you need channels XX and YY for other gear in your setup, you should probably disable this remote control feature.
But if you can use it,
Yeah.
what does it let you control?
Some pretty cool stuff for live performance or automation. For instance, sending MIDI notes on channel YY can directly switch individual steps of a sequence on or off.
Whoa, like playing the sequence steps from a keyboard.
Kind of. Imagine using a few keys to instantly mute or unmute specific beats in your sequence pattern. Really dynamic.
That sounds incredibly powerful for live jamming or complex arrangements.
It does.
Yeah.
And there's also MIDI control change remote control. You can use CC messages on channel XX to adjust things like velocity offset, tempo, the current step position, gate time, note duration.
Wow.
First last step, the playback mode, the MIDI channel for a row, even the MIDI event type assigned to a row.
So you could potentially automate almost anything from another controller or a DAW.
Pretty much. It really opens up deep performance and control possibilities, even if it's implemented in a slightly quirky, non-standard way.
Okay. The manual also briefly mentions troubleshooting and updates.
Yeah, just quickly, it says if the MAQ detects a MIDI error, it'll show an error code, and the advice is basically just turn it off and on again.
The classic fix.
Pretty much. We mentioned the SysX dump for backups. For updating older MAQs to version 3.0, the manual really pushes for professional help, especially if it's under warranty or you're not tech savvy. You could apparently damage it or avoid the warranty doing it wrong.
Sensible advice.
Same goes for adjusting the internal CV trimmers beyond the factory settings, probably best left to a pro if it's under warranty.
Okay, so we've really dug deep into this manual. If you had to boil it down, what are the key takeaways about the MAQ163?
I'd say don't let the analog style knobs fool you. This thing is deep. It's a really versatile sequencer capable of some seriously complex patterns, thanks partly to that historical input, maybe from Kraftwerk.
Right.
It offers unique control, especially with things like independent row lengths, modes, and that quirky remote control. It has its own way of doing things, maybe a bit of a learning curve.
But powerful once you grasp it.
Exactly. And flexible.
And hopefully walking through the manual like this has shed some light on those core ideas and maybe some of the less obvious tricks. We've only really covered what's in the manual, of course. There's always more to explore with hands-on use.
Definitely. Which kind of leads to a final thought, maybe for our listeners.
Yeah.
Considering this blend, the hands-on knobs, the analog feel, but with deep digital sequence control and memory, how might a device like this, with its history and specific architecture, change how you approach making music?
Good question.
Especially compared to just using a sequencer plugin in your computer? Does working with a dedicated hardware box like the MAQ, influenced by pioneers like Kraftwerk, spark different creative ideas or performance styles? What kind of sonic territory could it unlock?
Something to think about. That dedicated hardware workflow versus the infinite options of software. It's a different mindset, isn't it?
It really is. What possibilities does that physical interaction open up?